ਮੇਰੀ ਰਿਸਰਚ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਉਹਦਾ ਜੇ ਇਤਿਹਾਸਿਕ ਕੰਮ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਇਤਿਹਾਸਿਕ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਉਹ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਵਿਦਵਾਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅੱਜ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਐਕਸਪਲੇਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਅੱਜ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਦੇ ਸਕਦੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਓਕੇ ਤਾਂ My presentation is called The Historical Journey Through Rare Manuscripts and Relics of the Khalsa. So I'm going to begin. I'm going to gloss over this first. I'm going to start by just explaining a little bit about the Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. Now recently in modern times there seems to be some kind of debate as to whether Sri Dasam Granth Sahib is the Bani of Guru Gobind Singh. Now it's interesting because in modern times people have now started to make cracks into our road, the road of Sikhi. Now these cracks seem to be widening because people don't seem to understand where this road leads to. And hopefully this presentation will try and give you some explanation of where we want to try and go with our Sikh Itihas. So we know initially that Guru Granth Sahib is the primal scripture of the Sikhs. And accordingly, Sri Dasam Granth Sahib is referred to as Dasam Pasha Ka Granth, also known as the scripture of the 10th king. And hence it's known as a secondary Granth of the Sikhs. So why is it important when we combine Guru Granth Sahib and Sri Dasam Granth Sahib? Well, to begin with, compositions from both scriptures form the daily Nitnam. Secondly, the Amrit Sanjar is not possible without Bani from both scriptures. Interestingly, the Ardas or petition is recited before and after every Sikh ceremony. And some of you may or may not be aware, but the Ardas comes from the formulation of the first Padiya of Chandi Divar. Moving on from this, the Dasam Granth in some cases forms the primary scripture, and that is namely in the art of Shastra Vidya or the science of weapons. Shastra Vidya is primarily based on the recitation of Dasam Bani. So what is the name, what is the actual name of Dasam Granth? Well, according to scripture, according to the Anandapuri Bead of 1695-1696, on the Tatkara itself, it says, Bani Sri Mukhva Pashai Das. So that's interesting. One of the original manuscripts written during the time of Guru Gobind Singh refers to Dasam Granth Sahib as Bani. Some people say that certain compositions do not come under the term of Bani, but one of the original manuscripts does actually differ from that view. Another manuscript, the Patna Sahib Dasam Granth 1698, refers to the Granth as Pashai Dasve Juka Granth, again giving a similar title. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, Sri Mukhva Pashai Dasvi or Dasmi has been a consistent theme throughout the description of Dasam Granth Sahib. Continuing from there, in later sources, Dasvind or Dasma Pasha Ka Granth continues to be the name given to the Granth. So, essentially, the translation refers to as the Granth of Guru Gobind Singh. However, in modern times, the term has been used, or the popular name is Sri Dasam Granth Sahib, which was something which came about in the late 19th century. Okay? Then there are a number of compositions within the Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. Some of them form the Amrit Banis like Jap Sahib, and there's other compositions like Kalustad, Batitta Natak, the Chandi stories, Chobis Avtar, Teti Savaye, Khalsa Mahima, Shastra Naam Mala Purana, Chitta Pakhyan and Hikayatam. Follows very similar to the pattern of Guru Granth Sahib in terms of the number of angs, 1428. But interestingly, the actual language in which Sri Dasam Granth Sahib is written is Braj Pasha, which is the same language as Bhai Gurdas Vara, Guru Tegh Bahadur's Bani, And in terms of location, and in terms of where it was written, we can categorically say that it's written at Anandpur Sahib, Paonta Sahib and Babur Sahib. And I'll talk a little bit about Babur Sahib in a short while. So, some early manuscripts and a discussion and description of some early manuscripts. If we consider that Sri Dasam Granth Sahib, for some people, causes instances where there's some kind of debate, we need to sometimes turn to manuscript evidence to try and see if we can try and obtain a clearer picture. There are some manuscripts with handwritten panne or pages in Guru Sahib's hand itself. One of the original manuscripts is referred to as the Anandapuri bead, and like I just previously said, dated 1695-1696. This saroop contains the handwritten pages of Guru Gobind Singh of Jirta Pakyan. Very important this is. For those who don't seem to understand or accept the actual composition or the actual section referred to as Jirta Pakyan, there is actual handwritten pages of Guru Gobind Singh of Jirta Pakyan. The Bhai Mani Singh bead, written just slightly over the 1700s, contains the handwritten pages of Krishna Avatar, again in the hand of Guru Gobind Singh. There are several saroops also known as the Patna Sahib beads. One of the earliest is the 1698 recension. However, many people don't seem to understand that there were also copies made of that same saroop, but that's not dated. Later on, certain saroops which were produced at Damdama Sahib were produced under the care of Baba Deep Singh and Jeet Singh. So, the early the beads confirm the compositions were the creation of the Guru and were written by the Guru. The Anandapuri saroop serves as a work in progress bead, and I'll elaborate on that shortly. This picture that I've got here in front of me is one of the khas patre of the Guru Sahib. It's of the Bhai Mani Singh bead, okay, and it's one that Charan Singh Lamba has kindly provided with me today from his San Sabai magazine, which he used to edit. The khas patre on the left hand side and the actual compositions in the standard handwriting on the right hand side. Interestingly, whilst I've just discussed several recensions and saroops of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib, it's recently come to my attention that the Dasam Pothis were also in circulation at the time of Guru Gobind Singh. Circulation meaning that Guru Gobind Singh had also started creating handwritten Pothis of certain compositions. Now, some of these are actually kept in private collections. And doing my research on Sri Dasam Granth Sahib over the last 15 years, certain information has come my way, including there used to be a small pothi of Jopi Sahib with the shabds of Guru Tegh Bahadur in a certain manuscript. Unfortunately, that was stolen in 2003 from the Anandpur Sahib base where it was kept. There's other Dasam pothis with the descendants of Surajmal at Anandpur Sahib. And it's also come to my attention that there's handwritten pages of Kalki Avatar at Burj Baba Allah Singh Kala Mubarak, which is essentially the private collection of Maharaja Patiala. There is also some other pothis which have come to my attention again, and this feature in my forthcoming book, The Granth of Guru Gobind Singh, Essays, Lectures and Translations. Now, whilst I just showed you a picture of what we call the khas patre, this is something similar to what the Dasam pothis would look like. The actual style of writing is not something very consistent with what you would see nowadays. The actual style of writing, sometimes referred to as Anandpur Lippi or Khat Lippi, is actually witnessed in these panne here. Now these panne, including some handwritten pages of Bachetta Natak, are in the hand of Guru Gobind Singh itself. It's very interesting over the many years whilst I've been researching Sri Dasam Granth Sahib that every single time, or in later years, Bhai Mani Singh has always been seen as the creator and compiler of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. That is a myth. That is a big myth. We actually can ascertain and actually state that Guru Gobind Singh had created the Sri Dasam Granth Sahib during his time, and original manuscripts exist to this day. However, I want to touch on two specific compilers of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. So, Bhai Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh are well known and mentioned in Sikh history and Sikh Ityas. It is important, however, to recognize the names of other scribes who are not well known in the preparation of Dasam Granth manuscripts. So we're going to consider Bhai Hardas and Bhai Shia Singh. These individuals are sometimes mentioned in Sikh Ityas, but not to the level where they deserve wider recognition. Bhai Hardas was the grandfather of Jassa Singh Ramgarhia. He also fought battles alongside the Guru Sahib and Banda Bahadur as well. And what's important to recognize about Bhai Hardas is that he prepared an early recension of Guru Granth Sahib. This manuscript was dated 1682 and completed at Damdama at Anandpur Sahib. This was one of the earliest manuscripts which also contained the sloks of Guru Tegh Bahadur. It was kept at Sikh Reference Library and the manuscript number is given. Also within the manuscript was given the actual description, Sri Guru Gobind Singh Ji the Lakari Bhai Hardas Wali Beed. So it's essentially clear, or it should be made clear, that Bhai Haridas was one of the key Lakaris or scribes within Dasam Pasha Sahib's court or darbar. This particular manuscript also carried the Nishan of Guru Gobind Singh. Unfortunately, it was destroyed in Operation Blue Star in 1984. So a bit more significance about Bhai Hardas. He was a Hazuri Lakari, meaning he was official scribe of the bar of the 10th Guru. He was more prominent from what I can see than other scribes. Bhai Hardas was involved in the preparation of other Guru manuscripts, Guru Granth Sahib manuscripts, and pothis. Indeed, further research will actually show what these manuscripts to be. So whilst we can ascertain in terms of importance for the Guru Granth Sahib, what can we say in terms of Dasam Pasha Ka Granth? Well, it appears that he also included scribing Dasam Pasha Ka Granth. He was actually one of the several Lakaris who scribed Anandpuri Beed. His name appears within this manuscript, together with other scribes including Darbari Singh, Chota, Nahala and Bala. Sometimes people get confused by looking at the number of scribes within the Anandpuri Beed itself. And some people will question and actually say, well, it's written by several scribes. If you understand the court of Guru Gobind Singh, you will understand there was over 100 scribes working to full capacity, translating the Rachana of not just Guru Granth Sahib, Sri Dasam Granth Sahib, but other philosophies of the world as well. So by having 4 or 5 scribes within one manuscript is nothing unusual. So whilst the Anandpuri Beed contains the names of these Lakaris, it's actually a positive, because we can actually see the names of the scribes involved in the preparation. I want to just elaborate a little bit more on the Anandpuri Beed as well. Due to the dating of 1695, 1696, it makes it one of the earliest beads, but however it does make it one of the earliest in terms of Dasam Bani, based on what I've said in terms of the pothis which were also prepared. This bead also contains pictures of the Guru, the handwritten panne, and it shows editing by Guru Gobind Singh himself. Now we continue to a second scribe known as Bhai Shia Singh. His name appears in Sikh history, but his contribution has seldom been recognized. He was stationed at Delhi with the queens of the Khalsa, Mata Sundari and Mata Sahib Diwan. The darbar in Delhi became important in Sikh history, with Bhai Nandlal and Jassa Singh Ahluwalia also spending time there. Bhai Shia Singh was working together with Bhai Mani Singh in creating further copies of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. According to the historic letters sent from Bhai Mani Singh to Mata Sundari, he was searching for some of the rare handwritten panne of Guru Gobind Singh. The letter dated circa 1716, and it's also corroborated and mentioned in Bansavali Nama of 1769. So his contribution is one of the manuscripts known as a Sangrur Bead, a combined recension of Guru Granth Sahib and Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. According to Dr. Ashta in his poetry of the Dasam Granth, this is what he states. It should also be made clear that Dasam Granth Sahib manuscripts from the time of their inception and creation were sent to different parts of India and further as well, including one Sarup which, according to Dr. Ganda Singh and Dr. Kamarup Singh's thesis, one is dated 1712 and was actually sent to Kabul and within the certain Gurdwara of Afghanistan. At Gurdwara Mata Sundari itself, the board is made very clear in terms of Bhai Shia Singh's contribution of creating Sarups at that location, and anyone who does darshan there can actually find the history of Bhai Shia Singh down there as well. I wanted to elaborate on one other Sarup of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib, known as the Aurangabad bead. The Aurangabad bead is another early Sri Dasam Granth bead, and it's actually attributed to Bhai Daya Singh, one of the Panch Pyare. Bhai Daya Singh stayed at this location whilst delivering the Zafarnama to Emperor Aurangzeb. This particular manuscript is still in Prakash in Gurdwara Bhai Daya Singh itself. The significance of this bead, similar to what I've just mentioned earlier with regards to the Afghanistan beads, is that a large number of Sarups were spread across the subcontinent, showing the popularity of the Granth Sahib amongst the Sangats. This particular panna is the Zafarnama, which is contained within the Aurangabad bead. Now it's very interesting to note that even in the Bhai Mani Singh bead and several other Dasam Granth beads, when it came to the actual writing of the Zafarnama, it was actually written in the Persian, and then as opposed to in the Gurmukhi or Braj Bhasha, which other Sarups contain. I wanted to also elaborate on one of the locations of where Dasam Bani was Sampuran or actually finalized. And that is the historic location of Babur Sahib. Babur Sahib is very seldomly mentioned unless you actually know the significance of the location itself. This is a location where Tirtha Pakyan was actually completed by Guru Sahib. In his conclusion of Chopi Sahib, he states the work was completed, and he states it was completed in 1696 on the banks of the river Sutlej. For those who have never done darshan at Babur Sahib, it's very important that every Singh actually visits this location, and you can see the majestic views that Guru Sahib had whilst completing the Tirtha Pakyan at this location. Now, one of the interesting topics which turns up in conversations and debates is the Prakash of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of time to actually discuss the merits in its entirety. However, the Redname refer to Sri Guru Granth Sahib and Sri Dasam Granth being kept together. By this, Singh states, every day select some Bani from both Granths and commit it to memory again and again. Whatever is given the Dasam and Ard Guru, both are said to be the first and equal. The Takhts over the many millennium have had both Granths placed side by side. However, it should be stated, and it should be stated categorically, most Gurdwara do not have Sri Dasam Granth Sahib in Prakash at the Gurdwaras. However, it was displaced over the last 100 years, mainly during the Singh Sabha period of 1980 and the post period of 1984. According to one of the lectures I gave in Sweden a couple of months ago, far as I'm concerned, the modern debate on Sri Dasam Granth Sahib is exactly that, very modern. Just a continuation on this theme of Prakash of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. If we look at the locations of Amritsar and Nader Sahib, we still see that many Gurdwaras around the Takhts had or still has Prakash of both Granths. In Amritsar itself, at Sri Akal Takht Sahib, there used to be a Prakash of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. And interestingly, also at Gurdwara Ramsar, and even now to this day at Akali Phula Singh Burj, which is not too far from Harmandir Sahib. According to the Sodak Committee report, they refer to the Prakash of both Granths at Amritsar and also outside at Dashan Diori before the completion of their report as well. At Nader Sahib, at Takht Huzur Sahib and Gurdwara Mai Pago, and also several other Gurdwara, there is Prakash of both Granths there as well. This particular picture is just a lithograph of the British period, which shows the Harmandir Sahib, but at the forefront shows two Granthis actually reading from both Granths. This is very similar to the photograph which was created by Schoff, a Hungarian painter who shows the pictures of both Granths in Prakash as well. This image here itself is from Gurdwara Ramsar, which I just stated earlier that there was Prakash of both Granths, and this picture also depicts that both Granths were in Prakash, and hence the fresco which we can see here. As far as I'm aware, this fresco is no longer extant, which means it's no longer possible to be seen. Another part of my actual lecture today and discussion is Sikh relics and the Dasam Granth Sahib. It is important to stress that all religions promote their scriptures onto material items. For instance, Quranic verses can be seen on swords and armour. Verses from the Bible are inscribed on various artifacts as well. The transmission of Sikh scriptures has followed a similar route. However, the significance of Sikh relics has not been analysed or discussed in much detail. Sikh relics are as important as manuscripts in the dissemination and transmission of Gurbani, and I'm going to elaborate on several of these now. The Guru's Jarinna, which refers to the four mirrors in Persian, is an actual breastplate which Guru Sahib actually wore himself in battle, and contains the Bani of Japji Sahib, Jap Sahib, Akal Ustad and Shaskriti Slok as well. And like I stated, Guru Gobind Singh wore this in battle, and in his Brajata Natak itself, in the Battle of Bagani Sahib, he says the armour was pierced with an arrow. The piercing can actually be seen on the armour itself. Gurbani for the Guru was just more than manuscripts. Gurbani for the Guru has to be spread by material objects. The actual Guru's Jarinna, which he actually wore himself in battle itself. Interestingly, what we should be noted is that this Jarinna is not the only Jarinna of its type. A recent one was also surfaced in London, which was to the dismay of many people when it was actually placed on sale at Sotheby's. It was eventually withdrawn from sale due to the problems that were created by the actual selling of such a popular item. We should now actually discuss also the Ardas. As stated earlier on, the Ardas is recited at various times in Sikh ceremonies. The Ardas is composed of lines from Chandi Divar. The Guru apparently wrote the Ardas on material items including swords and even a copper plate. Guru Gobind Singh created these copper plates and gave them to Hindu priests at temples. It's pure speculation, but it seems apparent that the Guru gave the responsibility to the Hindu priests to actually show how Dharma needs to be spread in remote areas. So for us now, a discussion has to be on why the Guru Sahib has created a copper plate with the Ardas written on it. Copper plates, or Tamar Patre as they're called. On the right hand side we can actually see the copper plate itself with the Ardas is actually inscribed on it. On the left hand side is a Hukamnama which was given to the priests at the temple at the time when Guru Sahib actually visited them. The actual plate and Hukamnama is located at Kapil Mochan in Haryana. The plate bears the date 1679, and the Hukamnama on the plate states this has been given to Jwala Das Brahm on Tuesday, October the 14th, 1679. It goes on to state that any of his Sikhs who follows Hukam will be blessed. The Hukam is the Ardas itself. The opening lines of the Ardas are hence recorded on this plate. The significance of this object shows the Ardas has become more prevalent than previously thought, in order for Guru Sahib to actually write the Ardas on such thing as a copper plate itself. So, interestingly, critics like Teja Singh Bashoria and Ragi Darshan have disputed the time Bhagoti, which is prevalent throughout Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. Yet we can clearly see Sri Bhagoti Ji Sahai written on a copper plate and commissioned by Guru Sahib himself. There are other material objects as well, including the swords of Guru Gobind Singh. Some carry inscriptions, some bear the concepts and ideals of Guru Granth Sahib and Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. The sword for Guru Gobind Singh was the embodiment of Akal Purkh. The Shastras for the Khalsa are as important as Gurbani. These swords again signify the Bani of the Guru had other significant purposes than recital. The transmission of Bani was more than just oral or manuscript tradition. The invocation of Manglacharan Sri Bhagoti Ji Sahai appears at the start of most compositions with Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. It means divine sword protects and represents the Akal Purkh, the power of Akal Purkh to crush the evildoers. The sword is also seen as a symbol of justice, truth and all-prevailing, all-divine powers and virtues. Bhagoti Ji is also referenced and referred by Gurdas Sahib as the sword. This particular sword actually contains the actual phrase Bhagoti Sahai, and it's actually kept in Patiala itself. So again, interestingly, how the actual transmission of Dasam Bani is not just manuscript based, it's actually based on the actual material heritage of the Sikhs as well. Now, during the British period and beyond, the continuation of inscribing Dasam Bani on swords was also prevalent. This included the sword of Shyam Singh Atariwalia. On his sword itself is the actual verses of Shastranam Malapuran, and these are the famous verses which appear throughout Sikh Ityas.
Can I show the sword?
Oh, sorry. On the right hand side you can actually see portions of the sword, which is actually now kept with the descendants of Shyam Singh Atariwalia. The sword is so powerful that it actually poisoned the foes when he actually used it in battle. That was the power of Dasam Bani. That was the power on Dasam Bani inscribed on swords. Moving on then, in terms of the explanation of Dasam Granth Sahib and its importance throughout relics, I'm now going to discuss a little bit about the British period itself. There have been many British commentators referring to the Sikh scriptures. Personally, in my research, I've come across over 50 different commentaries on Sri Dasam Granth Sahib during the British period, ranging from Charles Wilkins in 1788, all the way through to Monier Williams in 1883, Major Bingley in 1899. What's apparent and should be made clear that the British did have different views on Sri Dasam Granth Sahib itself. And this included testimony from missionaries, British officers, travellers and artists as well. However, I want to actually discuss one specific manuscript which was written at the start of the 19th century by the actual linguist and orator, Dr. Leyden. Dr. Leyden was from Scotland and was a trained surgeon and linguist. He made the first English translation of Sikh and Punjabi texts around the early 1800s. This was at the British capital of Calcutta. He translated the works of Bhai Mani Singh, Bhai Gurdas II, as well as undertaking the first English translation of Prem Sumara Granth as well. These are kept in the British Library. These translations were brought out into the public in 2011 by the Punjab Cultural Association of the UK, and they are available on the internet to view. I want to digress a little bit from Sri Dasam Granth Sahib to just talk a little bit about the Prem Samara Granth. Dr. Leyden actually translated the Prem Samara Granth in its entirety, which means for a Britisher to actually translate what we call actual Rednama in its entirety is something incredible. This is an actual folio in his hand. I actually discovered this manuscript in 2006 in the British Library itself. The Ityas within Prem Samara Granth sheds light on the Raj and the rules of the Khalsa. The manuscript is dated 1808 and hence disproves the idea of the Prem Samara Granth being a product of the late 19th century. And the reason I want to discuss this actual manuscript was the fact that Dr. W.H. MacLeod changed his view on the dating of the manuscript shortly after I presented this English translation. So within the different translations undertaken by Dr. Leyden, he also completed the first translation of Bajita Natak. This was actually used by John Malcolm in his sketch of the Sikhs. The translations were unfortunately neglected and forgotten about not only by the British but also Sikhs as well. Britishers eventually were to forget about these translations, but then recently, like I said, were rediscovered. Dr. Leyden acknowledges that Sri Bajita Natak is part of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. He states at the end folios of his work, this longer work which Guru Gobind Singh to himself is reckoned by the Sikhs the Dasima Pasha Ka Granth. He was clearly knowledgeable translator but also knew about the scripture of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. Later translations, after the Anglo-Sikh Wars and the annexation of the Punjab, the British also wanted to translate the Sikh scriptures. They gave the job to individuals like Ernest Trump. He undertook part translations of Guru Granth Sahib and was unable to translate Sri Dasam Granth in its entirety. He unfortunately was unaware of Dr. Leyden's translations. Recently, the letters found at the National Archives of India shed light on the problem and lack of understanding by the translator. Trump started his work in Germany in 1869 on the translations of Guru Granth Sahib. In 1870, Trump underestimated the difficulty of the work. He asked if he could work with other people, and in 1871 he asked for more money and also stated he would translate the Granth of Guru Gobind Singh. Later in the same year, he states the work is too difficult and starts making excuses. Essentially, he starts saying that the Granths are inferior to the Bible. He resigns eventually from translating the Dasam Granth Sahib. It's important to actually know that whilst Trump's name is very famous, his actual understanding of the Granths was very shallow. He stated, or the writers actually stated, the whole Granth would be a useless undertaking for Guru Gobind Singh was acknowledged by only a small portion of the Sikh community, according to himself. The Redname of Guru Gobind Singh, which contained the constitution of Sikh Khalsa, are of far greater importance and offered to translate them instead. And that's the reason why he actually abandoned the project shortly after. The translation of Sikh works was also taken up by Max Arthur McAuliffe in his 5 volumes, The History of the Sikhs. However, he did not undertake a full translation of Bajita Natak either. So, the original translation by Dr. Leyden shows that he was the original translator of Punjabi and Sikh works. The significance, therefore, of Leyden's work is very clear to see. At the time of Khalifullah Singh, we had a Britisher who was translating the British Sikh works into English so everyone could read. And I want to conclude by stating the following. Manuscripts shed light on the compilation of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib. There is, however, a history of relics as well, including copper plates, breastplates and swords bearing the inscription of Dasam Bani. Translations from the British shed light on understanding Dasam Granth Sahib before and after the colonial period. Later translators neglected early Punjabi and Sikh translations. So what can we say as a conclusion in reference to Guru Granth Sahib and Sri Dasam Granth Sahib? We can essentially say Sri Dasam Granth Sahib, just like Guru Granth Sahib, has a verifiable history, and the same sources which are used to construct the compilation and creation of Guru Granth Sahib are used in the construction of Sri Dasam Granth Sahib's history as well. And that's my concluding piece for today. However, I wanted to actually just give a further notice that I will be releasing several books shortly, including Akali Fulla Singh and his turban, and a lot of my forthcoming work will be seen in the Granth of Guru Gobind Singh, essays, lectures and translations. I've also prepared several books on the British and the Sikhs as well, and for those who are not familiar with my original book, Sri Dasam Granth Sahib Questions and Answers, you should go get a copy of that. And further information can be seen at my websites of gsmann.com, sikhscholar.co.uk, and the English translations can be seen at drleyden.co.uk. Once again, I would like to thank everyone who has turned up to this presentation today, the worldwide Sangat who are listening to this presentation on sikhsangat.net and San Jose Gurdwara. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.